Welcome to the Edge of Innovation with InSource, the podcast that takes you on a thrilling ride through the world of digital transformation. We invite you to join us as we dive into the latest trends, cutting-edge technologies, and game-changing strategies that are revolutionizing manufacturing and industrial settings. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just curious about the future of industrial innovation, we've got something for everyone. In this first episode for 2025, we're joined by two InSource legends, CEO and President Rob Bansek, and Vice President for Client Success, Kevin Modlin. In this interview, Kevin asks Rob to give his insights into what 2025 may bring. Let's listen in.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for joining today's podcast. I heard that what we're supposed to talk about is the future and sort of trends that are coming at manufacturers and industrial customers in 2025 and beyond. Is that what you prepared for?
Prepared might be an overstatement, Kevin, but yeah, I'd love to chat about the future, the trends, what we're seeing in manufacturing and industrial operations.
And you don't mind occasionally opining as we have this conversation, right? I think I know you well enough to know that's true.
I think you need to define the word opine. If you mean pontificate, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So let's dive right in with the setup question, which is, in your role as CEO, you must be spending a fair amount of time thinking about trends, looking at, what's life like for our customers and what does that mean for us and how could we better serve them. So what do you think are the top 5 big picture trends coming at industry in 2025? And I have knighted myself as the official judge of this podcast. So if you can't narrow it to 5, I'll allow a bonus pick or 2.
Wow. Yeah. So, interesting. You could have just my view, or you could take a look at what some of the analysts are saying, right? And most of the analysts are closely aligned on what we see as maybe the top 10. I think 5 or 6 of them really stick out to me. I believe the cloud and cloud-enabled analytics, some of the advanced math that's out there is a serious trend. I believe digital twins, but digital twins for the right purpose are a trend. The combination of connected worker and workforce enablement because of the people issues we see today in manufacturing is in the top 5 for me. There's a lot of maybe discussion around the concept of servitization and or outcomes. That seems to rank up there today as well. And generally speaking, the argument between digitization and digitalization, depending on where you fall in the importance of those two words, that probably ranks up there as well.
Okay. Is that 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I was trying to make notes there along the way. You didn't mention AI. Is that because you don't see that as a trend, or it's a flash in the pan, or what are your thoughts about that?
Probably because I hear it so often now, used in so many different definitions. There's so many different definitions of AI out there. But yes, AI is a trend. I think of AI more in the cloud and advanced analytics, the things that's enabled today. I know the general population may think AI more like ChatGPT and large language models and things of that nature. But yeah, AI is definitely a trend, and I think we have some work to do to really define what that means for this industry.
Okay. So for purposes of the rest of this conversation, would you lump AI into your cloud analytics trend item? Is that what you're thinking?
I will probably do both. I'll lump it in there casually, and then I'll separate it out depending on what the questions and where the dialogue takes us.
All right. This is going to make the moderator's job more difficult, but okay. So let's dive into each one of those a little. I want to start with the least familiar word I heard. You said outcomes or servitization. I think that's what you said, but say more about servitization.
So many of our customers, the industry itself, they're used to buying a product more than anything else, right? They buy a piece of software, they buy a piece of hardware, it's tangible, they get what they get. Servitization is more the concept of buying an outcome. So instead of buying a piece of software that measures your yield or buying a piece of software that understands the health of your infrastructure, you're actually subscribing to a service where the service comes with the use of a piece of technology, but it also is backed by people and or AI, to your point earlier, is backed by people. And what you're looking for is the outcome. So you might be subscribing to a service like yield, increase in yield as a service, or uptime as a service, or infrastructure health as a service. So rather than just paying for a piece of software, you're paying for the knowledge that comes with it or the experience that someone might have that's operating it. And it's their job, like a managed service provider, to keep your system healthy, keep your system up, to help you find ways to increase yield, things of that nature. So the focus is on the deliverable versus the product, the outcome versus the technology.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've been hearing about that some, both, I would say mostly outside of the manufacturing space, but some inside the manufacturing space as well. In fact, I was reading recently that Philips offers lighting as a service to some of their corporate clients now. So instead of buying light bulbs, you're paying Philips, whatever it is, X dollars a month, and they do all the bulb replacement, make sure that you've got energy efficient bulbs and you reduced waste. And so if you're a building operator, that's just one less thing you got to think about. Now that might not be directly applicable to manufacturers, but I think we're going to see analogs to that showing up in the manufacturing space. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, it does. We already see it in the manufacturing space today. People pay for things like vibration analysis as a service. OEMs put things like compressors and generators in the marketplace today, and they're monitoring them from afar from a maintenance perspective. So you might buy the equipment, but you're also buying uptime for that equipment, and the OEMs are paying attention to that today and creating service requests on their own behalf. To ensure that their end users getting the uptime. So it's an expansion of a concept that's already in. It just happens to have a name that's shown up now over the last 3 or 4 years.
To your point about vibration analysis, when I worked directly in a manufacturing plant 25 years ago, we had a company that did some vibration analysis for us. And I feel like what's different today is that, you might be paying for vibration analysis as a service, or you might be paying for, a customer might be paying for, the resolution of vibration problems that occur. Maybe the commercial model is changing or subject to change in the future.
So I think that's almost a dichotomy there, right? A bifurcation of what we're talking about is in the days past, somebody did come in and do vibration analysis on your key motors and drives and things of that nature, and then they told you what the result was. Today, they're monitoring it in real time and they're taking action so that you don't have a breakdown, you don't have a bearing problem, you don't have an overheating problem, and it's kind of blind and it's happening in the background. They're responsible for the maintenance, they're responsible for keeping it up. And they own it now rather than just delivering you results.
Yeah. All right, I get that. Putting a bow on that servitization thing, boy, it really feels like that concept is gaining momentum in many, many areas and likely to continue to gain momentum. And it feels to me like manufacturing is a little bit behind the curve on the uptake for those kinds of things, but probably going to be changing in the future, it seems to me.
Sometimes we're a little slower at things in this world, but if you think about that concept and you think about one of the major problems we face in manufacturing and industrial operations, we have a people problem today too, right? So sometimes we talk about our people problem in like a connected worker solution or an enabled worker solution. Well, servitization is another way to attack that people problem. In fact, today, we have a lot of young people coming out of school that understand advanced analytics and the modeling and the simulation that goes on, so they get the math, but they lack the industry knowledge. We also have a lot of people in industry like me who are getting dated who don't really have the simulation and model capability anymore. That's not how we were trained or what we learned. So somebody like InSource, that has both of those now helps to overcome that in industry. We understand the technology. We have smart people like you. We have dated people like me who understand process and, manufacturing. When we combine the best of those worlds, servitization actually can help overcome some of the people issues we experience today, some of the knowledge that's left of the plant, the environment.
Yeah, that's a different perspective. And by the way, the lack of hair sort of puts me in the camp of the dated, maybe not you, but either way. So one of the other trend areas you mentioned was digital twin. And boy, we hear that term a lot. For sure, there's no standard definition. In the manufacturing context, what do you mean by digital twin?
So So there's a couple of things when I talk about it, depending on the audience, right? You could have a data digital twin where you are modeling what's going on in the plant with an offline data set.
Yeah.
You can do some simulation. You can begin to try to predict and prescribe what might happen under certain conditions. That's one view, kind of a data oriented digital twin. The other view is, there are a lot of vendors now that can really create a true like three-dimensional digital twin, right? From drawing all the way through operations. More complicated, but also a true use case for digital twin in manufacturing. And I've seen some incredible uses where you might have an alert or an alarm in your graphics for your SCADA system, taking you all the way down to the CAD drawing of the original design of that equipment and who the supplier is, and having that work connected electronically from design through operations. So depending on the audience, both of those are really good uses of the concept of digital twin.
Yeah, so a physical representation and a data representation is
Yeah.
the two things I hear you saying there. So it
Yeah.
seems like the physical representation might have great use case there, might be in training and skill building for folks who don't have as much experience as the gray-haired folks like me and you.
Yeah. We see that a lot now, building training and simulation environments, especially for me. I'll go back to the people problem again, right? If you have our 30-year experienced employee used to be replaced by a 10-year experienced
Yeah.
employee. That 30-year employee is now being replaced by a 3-year experienced employee, and sometimes maybe in a 3-month. And those, if we can create a digital twin for simulation, we can bring the experience curve faster. We can shorten that time.
And the data digital twin, to me, seems like it's a prerequisite for some of the things that companies might want to do in the realm of analytics, particularly advanced analytics and machine learning kind of things. If we've got a data digital twin that tells us how this machine should react, has reacted, that digital twin from the data perspective seems like a prerequisite for future use cases.
Yeah, I love that, but that's also loaded with, I'm going to use the word problem for the conversation.
Well, that's okay.
We spent an inordinate amount of time designing our systems for data collection, but not really for data consumption. So you take any single plant, any single line, and you make a data digital twin. That's one data set. In reality, you probably want to compare that with a similar line in a different plant, or a similar line running a different product, or a similar line running at a different time of day. And this context becomes a huge issue in creating those. Because we didn't spend our time thinking about data from a consumption perspective, sometimes the contextualization of that to really get to the prescription you're looking for is a huge hurdle.
Do you have thoughts about solving the context concern?
Context is about planning, right? Context is, first of all, if you understand that there's contextualization issues, you can bridge that gap.
Yeah.
Things like unified namespaces help bridge that gap. As a for instance, we have things like system platform, and we have PI's asset framework. I mean, there are places in which you can do this. You can do it with ETL tools if you really wanted to. Mm-hmm. The bigger issue is not can you solve it. The bigger issue is really being aware that it's a potential issue. At least
fair.
Rob's perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's use that data digital twin as a springboard into cloud, analytics, AI, and we could spend the next 75 podcasts talking about this topic probably. But what are the highlights of that sort of suite of things in your mind?
Yeah, so really twofold. The cloud brings scalability to this that we really hadn't had before, right? You almost had to go all in, and the expense of the infrastructure, and your use of it is up and down. So the scale of the cloud brings some real power behind this. The tools themselves, both of you and I are old enough to remember Quattro Pro and Lotus 123 and now Excel, right? And some of these tools are really just super huge spreadsheets, right? But in the spreadsheet world, it takes quite the mathematician to create a formula to get to a conclusion. These tools now, gosh, my kids can, well, of course my kids could use them because they were trained on it, but maybe I should say my wife could use them, who has no formal training in this, because the user front end now has become just simple. Simple doesn't do it justice, but it's way more easy to use these tools today. So I've got the scale of what the cloud brings, data, compute power, and I've got the user interfaces of these really advanced tools to drive analytics, to drive prescriptive action. It's a great intersection. We've got a lot to learn because you can't do the analytics in a vacuum. You still need some industry or process knowledge as you set some of those rules and math up. But the use cases now are numerous. There are volume of them.
That reminds me of two things. So your mention of the infrastructure required. I don't know, for whatever reason that made me think of the data center that Elon Musk is building with 100,000 GPUs. Nobody, well, not nobody, because Elon Musk can afford it, but very few, even companies could afford that sort of infrastructure investment. But if you need 20 minutes of time from some massive cluster like that, those kinds of things are going to be not only approachable but much more affordable as these giant data centers begin to come online. And so that was a thought around infrastructure to support the analytical needs that might exist a year or 5 down the road. And you talked about use cases, so let's pivot slightly and talk about AI. And I know you're hearing AI too much, you may not want to talk about it, but what do you think are the use cases we're going to see for AI in manufacturing in the next year or two? So we kind of put a little bit of a more narrow time horizon on that.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a significant pickup in the use of AI around reliability, around equipment reliability, and trying to predict and or prescribe what can be done to keep equipment up. We're also seeing it on the process side, how to better use, how to better mix and match your input variables to get the output that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Usually the biggest hurdle in both of those cases is just overcoming legacy thinking, because we all have been trained that it's X plus Y plus Z gives me the output that I'm looking for. So when somebody tells me to change Y, I go, wait a second, I've been doing it this way for so long. So both of those are just relatively straightforward use cases, but yet sometimes difficult just because of the legacy thinking we bring to them.
Yeah, we built a lot of manufacturing processes with empirical evidence and school of hard knocks over so many years, and it's hard to turn over the thinking in those kinds of processes to an algorithm that you can't really understand. It seems to me that manufacturing is just in such a great place to leverage AI and advanced analytics tools. We've been capturing just tons and tons of data for decades, so we've got so much data that's available that we can leverage and bring to bear to solve these kinds of problems. That's driving a lot of innovation around, what do we do with that? What kind of algorithms can we build to predict, future behaviors or to prescribe actions that should be taken to get the result we're looking for? So in my mind, there are a number of converging factors that make AI and other advanced analytics techniques super valuable in the manufacturing space. And I think we're going to see a tremendous acceleration of that.
So we should, if we don't, we're missing the boat. I mean, you and I, the last couple of minutes, we've been talking about it from a math perspective.
Yeah.
Think about it from a large language model perspective. And if I connect back to the people issue, most of that information is stored someplace. If we can put some boxes around it and make it readily available to an operator, to a technician, to a maintenance person, I mean, how much quicker or more quickly can we solve problems? And just by doing that, create efficiencies, overcome knowledge issues. So, yeah, the chat GPT of manufacturing.
Well, that reminds me that we saw this in just sort of a future state vision, but it really is exciting, the possibility of, instead of bringing up the report that I bring up every morning when I get to the plant, if I'm the production supervisor, I've got this report or suite of reports that I look at because that's what I've done for the last decade. But, what if I just came in and I typed into my large language model kind of thing, what were the problems in the last shift? I got to look through the data and find them. I just say, what were the problems? Or how did the bagger run? Or whatever. Pick our problem child piece of equipment, and I just go ask it in natural English and say, how did this thing run yesterday? It's exciting what could be possible over the next few years, merging the large language model with the amount of data we're collecting in manufacturing.
So I would amp that up even one more variable, Kevin. We have in manufacturing and industrial operations, we have a wide variety of people and background, races and ethnicities and languages that we have to overcome as well. And large language models, yes, it can present to you and I in English, but I could say the same thing in Spanish. I could say the same thing in Cantonese. I could say the same thing in pick your language. So now we can bridge a communication gap too.
That's a great point, and this opens up lots of rabbit trails for me. But one of them is we've been playing around with a tool that lets us put English language SOPs in a sort of a curated large language model and surface an interface that allows you to ask questions of that in any language you want. So if you'd like to get the cleaning procedure for the mixer, you can ask that question in Spanish and get back an answer in Spanish, even though the documentation is in English. So that's a really great point. Another one of the trends that you mentioned was, I don't know exactly how you characterized it, but digitization versus digitalization or something to that effect. What was on your mind there?
Just the sometimes the misuse of those words, right? Because digitization is really about ones and zeros when it all comes down to it. I think digitalization is a much better word for what we talk about in industry, where we're doing something, where we're using technology to enable what used to be non-technology enabled for the purpose of streamlining or optimizing. So it's the use of the technology, it's using technology to enable. So I happen to like that word better. That's just Rob's perspective on it.
Yeah.
And that we're doing a lot, if you think about it. We are now using technology to enable process. We're now using technology to enable data collection. Almost if we go back to, I go back 25 years. I mean, to the first push, 25, maybe it's 35, maybe I'm older, but, the concept of digital transformation, might say started with the idea of moving a push button and putting an HMI screen in it. It might go back that far. It might go back from a clicky-clack relay to a PLC. That could be digital transformation. And now we're talking about it, in orders of magnitude different. We're talking about transformation organizationally. So all these words intersect for me, and oftentimes we use them interchangeably, and I don't think that's fair. I think that creates more of a hurdle for people than what it needs to.
I don't know if I got this totally right, but I think what you're describing is digitization is just the process of taking something we were doing on paper,
analog
and
to
converting
digital.
that to right. I hear you. And digitalization is a bigger picture. We're doing something different, something novel. I don't know if that captures the spirit of what you were saying.
Yeah, maybe not novel, maybe not different, but maybe leveraging technology to do something we did in a more of a manual way. And then transformation might be, I might throw novel in there because transformation's multidimensional. So, digitalization, digital transformation.
Yeah. That makes me think of somewhere along the way in introducing the trends, you talked about the evolution of the workforce or skills gap, and so digitalization might be one of the techniques that we use to address that. But talk more about what was in your mind there.
So the digitalization, when I think about workforce and stuff, there's some great tools out there today. Even the conversation we had about large language models, right? Using tools like pick your large language model to enable an operator to do something. So now I've got an uninformed operator. I've got a large language model. I've taken, history paper. I digitized it. I made it available, and now I can actually do the job without much formal training necessarily, or maybe without much formal experience necessarily. So I'm using that technology to enable something to happen that I wouldn't have been able to do as efficiently in the past. The old 3-inch SOP binder that sat at the beginning of the line that had 3 inches of dust on top of it because nobody paid attention to it.
Yeah. Now we put that, on an iPad at the operator station where they don't have to thumb through every page. They query and say, I need a cleaning procedure for this mixer, and they go directly to it.
And maybe even more amped up use cases. Not only do I get the procedure, but there's a workflow behind it. So as I finish step 1, it tells me to do step 2. If step 2 has a problem, it branches into a problem-solving workflow for me. So
yeah. And reminds me that my certification for this particular activity is going to expire in 45 days, so I got to go recertify on whatever that process is.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, anything else in the vein of workforce evolution or optimization or?
You know, this might just be a pet peeve of mine, but as we think about the workforce today, we're really talking about trends. And I think this was spurred by the keynote that I did at our client event where I talked about innovation before I really got into the trends. And, innovation in and of itself is not a trend. I think you once used in a conversation with me, it's an imperative. And I think in the case of this next generation, in our space in manufacturing and industrial operations, if we don't innovate, if we don't start to leverage things like AI and large language models and this new digital world, if we don't think digital first, we're not going to get the next generation. So, we want to enable the workforce, but we're not going to have it if we don't innovate. And today's innovation is having a digital first mentality. That's the way we'll attract people back to manufacturing.
Yeah.
And so it's more than one. These things all intersect to me. In some form or fashion in the broader picture.
Yes, and you mentioned innovation there, and innovation is sort of underpinning and put cresting. There's a wave cresting, maybe not even cresting, maybe it's still building for every one of these trend areas that's driven by innovation, and it's sort of a cycle of things happening these days. In the vein of workforce optimization or workforce evolution, the other thing that strikes me is there continues to be a need to carefully plan and execute the rollout of technology improvement. So we're talking a lot about new technologies and bringing those to bear, and we're talking about new and more sort of digital first workforces, but we still got in manufacturing a legacy workforce. I think it's important to continue to pay attention to the change management process that comes along with any new technology deployment. Thoughts around that?
Lots. That's such a loaded question.
I teed that one up for you.
Yeah. The legacy workforce was also probably not an empowered workforce, at some level, right? So you also have to deal with that. One of the mistakes we make, and I'll just say in manufacturing, when I talk about we, I'm talking about the global we here, not InSource, not you, not me, but is we looked at technology to be the savior. And what we don't realize is technology is only an enabler. It should be enabling, it should enable sound process. It should enable an engaged workforce. It should enable some discipline in how we attack the problem. That the technology is there to make our life easier, to support us in the decisions that we make and to support us in to do the job that we're doing. It's not there to do those things. And when we design it and implement it, we often look at like it's going to produce the results and we forget the people side. And people process and technology has shown up in manufacturing now for the last 6 or 7 or 8 years. It's almost buzzwordy. I go back to the middle 2000 knots, like 2006, 7, and 8, when we cranked it up at InSource, and we were kind of ahead of the curve, right? To me, so I go back to the idea of innovation. We were out in front a little bit of manufacturing, and we pulled back. And now, simply put, the outcomes that people expect, the outcomes they desire, if they're not deploying technology with the focus on how does it change the process and how does it empower my people, if they're not doing it with those other two variables, they're going to miss that outcome. And or it's going to be a very collapsed success cycle. It won't sustain itself over time.
Yeah, until we get to the place where AI considers all the inputs and tunes all the parameters in a closed loop way, we're still going to have people. Those people need to be empowered, and those people need to have the best tools we can provide to them for real-time decision making. All the trends we've been talking about overlay with that in my mind. So.
And designed for them to use, not designed for me to use, right?
Oh yeah, good point.
I mean, think about how many places we've been where the technology has been designed for the engineer, not really the operator, the technician, the maintenance person, the production supervisor. They have to be designed with their use case in mind, not ours. So, another flaw.
Any trends we didn't cover sufficiently?
Well, there could be the trend of whether this podcast actually has a session 2, but that's a
Yeah,
different
yeah,
story.
yeah, that's right.
So many of these things we could talk about. I think both of us, I could turn this around, Kevin, and say which one of those that I mentioned intrigue you the most that we didn't talk about, and what's your perspective on it?
In terms of what's possible, I think cloud and advanced analytics, and I'm lumping AI into that, represents the biggest opportunity. Now, with great power comes great responsibility, so we have to be careful about how we design and roll out those kinds of things. But I think we're going to see a major impact to manufacturing if we can do a good job of deploying those kinds of technologies on a broad scale. I think that is really going to make a step change in manufacturing and industrial operations.
When you think about that, Kevin, it feels like you've seen some places where we didn't overcome the hurdles, where we weren't able to do it. So, and maybe a better way to say it, what do you think are the common pitfalls, the common issues that we have with getting that rolled out today?
I thought I was going to ask the questions here.
Sorry.
No, I totally agree. And common pitfalls, perhaps not focusing well enough, not defining the problem well enough. So, particularly when we start talking about AI, right now, there is a sense that I'll just dump a bunch of data into a black box and it'll tell me what I need to know. And we're not there yet. I don't know if we're ever going to get there. But if you say the problem I have, the narrow problem I'm trying to solve is this thing, I think we have seen great success when we focus that laser on a concentrated point, and we don't just shine a diffuse flashlight on the problem, but we really leverage the technology in a focused way, which means we have to identify what really are the problem we're trying to solve, what really are the problems we're trying to solve, and we have to guide those advanced analytics tools with some understanding of, here's what we think the controllable variables that influence that outcome are, and we can use tools to help refine that over time, but to your point from earlier, a concern or something, a hurdle we got to get over is thinking we're just going to dump a bunch of data into a black box and it's going to tell us what we need to know out of that. That's not going to happen.
So Kevin, I know you well enough. Let me slice and dice a couple of the words that you used. I know you're supposed to be asking me questions, and I'll jump in. But you used problem and outcome both.
Yeah.
In that last 30 seconds. Do you think we should be focused on the problem, or do you think we should be focused on the outcome when it comes to the application?
Fair. Those are kind of two sides of the same coin, but if you got to pick one to focus on, you focus on the outcome. What I want to do is decrease consumption of this raw material by 5%. And that outcome, normally those kinds of outcomes have and if we really get focused on what's the outcome we're looking for, then we can turn around and say, what are the things that are contributing to the overconsumption of that material and go attack those.
So that was a loaded question because I wanted to talk about life cycle for a second instead of project, right? We often use when we talk about the problem, we put these project blinders on, and as soon as we solve the problem, we move on.
Yeah.
When we talk about the outcome, oftentimes our aperture, I think is the right word here, is open a little wider. And as we try to go after that outcome, other things occur during that time, and they seem to open up a parallel outcome that you go face. So we've got all these circles, concentric circles running now, and this idea of using AI or back to just generically transformation seems more like a life cycle to me than it is a project. And that's why I like to think about the word outcome versus the word problem. And that's splitting hairs, but it's a different lens to look at what we're trying to attack.
Yeah, that lens, one of the sort of drivers to use a lens like that is that the project mentality often results in improvements that aren't sustained. And so the outcome focus, if you're really focused on the outcome, one part of what you want to do is make sure you sustain that over time. Okay. So that's a fair point.
Which is where continuous improvement came from 20 years ago, right? Yeah. For the analogy I like to use with the folks I speak to is most people are familiar with Six Sigma, which is define, measure, analyze, and improve. I'm sorry, it includes control. We just don't usually like to add that step in, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
I think we covered more than trends. We covered some trends and some history and some correlated people elements, but great conversation, and I appreciate your time, Rob.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our channels for up-to-the-minute updates and new episode releases. As always, we'd love to hear from you too. Send in your ideas and questions so we can use them in a future episode. And until next time, stay on the edge of innovation.